The sky was bleeding red over the Colorado Rockies, a sunset so fierce it looked like the mountains were on fire. I was 8, wedged in the back seat of our old Chevy Suburban, clutching my stuffed wolf. Its fur matted from years of being my only confidant. The engine growled as we wound through the dusty back roads of Larimer County, the kind of roads that don't show up on GPS, where gravel spits under tires and the world feels like it's holding its breath. My parents, Claire and Marcus, were silent up front, their faces carved in shadow. Mom's manicured nails tapped the armrest, a nervous rhythm that didn't match the country song humming low on the radio. Dad's knuckles were white on the wheel, his jaw tight, like he was chewing on words he'd never say. I didn't know it then, but that night would crack my life in two, before and after. "Almost there, Emily," Mom said, her voice sharp, like she was slicing through the silence. She didn't turn around. Her blonde hair was pulled tight in a bun, not a strand out of place, like she'd spent an hour in front of a mirror for a trip to nowhere. "Just a quick stop at Grandpa Henry's." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. My wolf shadow was pressed against my chest, its button eyes glinting in the fading light. "Are we staying long?" I asked, my voice small, barely louder than the crunch of tires on gravel. Dad cleared his throat, a rough sound like he was dislodging something stuck. "Not long," he muttered, eyes fixed on the road. "Just need to sort some things out." "Sort what out?" I wanted to ask, but I didn't. At 8, you don't push when the air in the car feels like it's about to snap. I hugged Shadow tighter, my fingers tracing the frayed seam along his ear. The Suburban lurched as we turned onto the long dirt driveway leading to Grandpa Henry's ranch. The old wooden sign at the gate read Harper in chipped white paint, swinging gently in the evening breeze. The ranch house loomed ahead, its weathered cedar siding glowing under the porch light. It was the kind of place you'd see in a John Wayne movie, rugged, unyielding, with a wraparound porch and a barn that sagged like it was tired of standing. The car stopped, but the engine kept running. Mom twisted in her seat, her blue eyes catching mine for the first time all day. They were cold, like lake ice in January. "You're staying here for a bit, okay?" she said. Her lips painted a red so bright it looked wrong against her pale skin. "Grandpa's expecting you." "Be good." My stomach twisted, a knot I couldn't name. "Staying?" I echoed, my voice cracking. "What about you guys?" "We need a break," Dad said, his voice flat like he was reading from a script. He didn't look at me, just stared out the windshield at the darkening pines. "Work's been complicated. We'll be back soon." I blinked, waiting for more. A hug, a smile, something to make the words feel less like a door slamming shut. Nothing came. Mom adjusted her scarf, a silk thing that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and glanced at Dad. "Let's make this quick," she whispered, like I wasn't sitting right there. I pushed the car door open, my sneakers hitting the gravel with a crunch that echoed in the quiet. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush, sharp and clean, but it did nothing to loosen the tightness in my chest. I slung my backpack over one shoulder, Shadow dangling from my hand. The porch light buzzed, casting long shadows that stretched toward the car like fingers trying to pull me back. I turned, expecting Mom to say something else, maybe "I love you," or "we'll call tomorrow." Instead, she was already facing forward, her profile sharp against the dashboard light. Dad shifted into reverse, and the Suburban rolled back, tires spitting dirt. "Wait," I said, stepping forward, my voice louder than I meant. "Mom? Dad?" The taillights glowed red, unblinking. The car didn't stop. I stood frozen, my heart hammering as the Suburban disappeared down the driveway, swallowed by the dusk. They didn't look back. Not once. The engine's rumble faded, leaving only the hum of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. I was alone, 8 years old, standing in the dust with a stuffed wolf and a backpack that felt too heavy for my shoulder. The front door creaked open behind me. Grandpa Henry stood there, his flannel shirt untucked, his gray hair catching the porch light like a halo. He wasn't tall, but he had a solidity to him, like the mountains themselves, worn but unmovable. His eyes, the same hazel as mine, studied me for a long moment. "Figured they might pull something like this," he said, his voice low, not angry but heavy, like he'd been carrying the weight of their betrayal for years. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was too tight, my eyes stinging. He stepped onto the porch, his boots scuffing the wood, and knelt beside me. He took Shadow from my hand, brushing the dust off its fur with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "Come on, kid," he said. "Let's get you inside." The ranch house smelled of cedar and coffee, the kind of smell that wraps around you like a blanket. A plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes sat on the kitchen table, steam curling up like it had been waiting for me. Grandpa didn't ask questions, didn't push me to talk. He just sat across from me, sipping black coffee, his eyes flicking between me and the window, like he was half expecting those taillights to reappear. I took one bite of the potatoes, then pushed the plate away. My stomach was too knotted to eat. That night, he showed me to a small bedroom down the hall. The walls were lined with faded maps of Colorado and black and white photos of Henry fishing in some mountain stream. The bed had a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender, and I curled up under it, Shadow tucked under my chin. "They'll come back tomorrow," I whispered to him, my voice barely a breath. "Maybe the day after." The hallway light stayed on all night, a soft glow seeping under the door. The next morning I sat on the porch swing, my backpack at my feet, watching the driveway. Every crunch of gravel made my heart leap. A delivery truck, a neighbor's Jeep, nothing more. Days blurred into weeks. I helped Grandpa with chores, feeding the chickens, stacking firewood, anything to keep my hands busy. But every afternoon I'd sit by the front window, waiting for a car that never came. By the end of the month, I stopped asking Grandpa if they'd call. By fall, I stopped expecting them to. Life at the ranch settled into a rhythm. Grandpa taught me how to mend a fence, how to spot a storm coming over the mountains, how to listen to the land. He wasn't a talker, but his silences were kind, not like the sharp-edged quiet of my parents' car that night. I started school in town, a new backpack slung over my shoulder. My address now Harper Ranch, Larimer County. Kids whispered about the girl whose parents ditched her, but I learned to ignore them. I was Emily Harper, granddaughter of Henry, and that was enough. Or so I thought. One night when I was 9, I wandered too far from the ranch, chasing the glow of fireflies into the woods. The air was thick with pine, the ground soft with needles. I didn't hear the low growl until it was too close. A black bear, its eyes glinting in the moonlight, lumbering toward me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I backed up, tripping over a root, Shadow falling from my hands. The bear huffed, its breath steaming in the cool air. I scrambled toward a storm cellar I'd seen near the barn, its rusted door half hidden in the grass. I yanked it open, the hinges screaming, and tumbled inside, slamming it shut just as the bear's claws scraped the metal. I sat in the dark, trembling, the smell of damp earth choking me, until Grandpa's voice called my name hours later. He didn't scold me, just pulled me into a hug that smelled of tobacco and safety. At 10, I nearly drowned in the creek behind the ranch. It was spring, the water swollen from snowmelt, rushing over rocks like it was angry. I'd been trying to catch minnows, my sneakers slipping on the slick stones. One misstep and I was under, the current dragging me like a rag doll. My lungs burned, my hands clawing at nothing. I thought of Mom's red lipstick, Dad's white knuckles, and how they'd never know if I didn't make it. Then my fingers caught a branch and I hauled myself to the bank, gasping, soaked, alive. Grandpa found me shivering, wrapped me in his jacket, and carried me home. "You're tougher than that creek," he said, and I believed him. By 12, I faced a different kind of danger. A wildfire swept through the county, the sky turning an eerie orange, ash falling like snow. The ranch was on the evacuation list, but Grandpa refused to leave. "This land's been Harper for a century," he said, filling buckets with water. I helped him soak the perimeter, my hands blistered from the hose. The flames were close enough to hear their crackle, the heat licking at my face. A spark caught the barn's roof, and I climbed a ladder to douse it, my heart pounding as embers rained down. The fire passed, sparing the house, but the barn's roof was half gone. Grandpa ruffled my hair. "You're a fighter, Emily." At 14, I got lost in a blizzard while checking the cattle fences. The snow came down so fast it erased the world, turning the plains into a white void. My boots sank deeper with every step, the cold biting through my coat. I couldn't see the ranch, couldn't hear anything but the wind's howl. Panic clawed at me, but I remembered Grandpa's words, "Follow the fence line home." I gripped the wire, my gloves tearing, my fingers numb, until I saw the porch light glowing like a beacon. Grandpa was waiting, his face pale but steady. "You're not allowed to scare me like that," he said, but his hug was fierce. The worst came at 16. I was driving Grandpa's old truck to town when the brakes failed on a steep downhill. The pedal sank to the floor, useless, as the truck picked up speed. My hands shook, the road blurring as I swerved to avoid a ditch. I downshifted, praying the engine would slow me down, and aimed for a gravel turnout. The truck skidded to a stop inches from a drop-off, my breath ragged. Grandpa had the truck towed and checked. "Someone cut the brake line," he said quietly, his eyes dark. He didn't say who, but I knew. Claire and Marcus were circling, waiting for their chance. Now, at 18, I stood in the church for Grandpa Henry's funeral, my black dress too tight, my heart heavier than ever. The pews were packed with ranchers, townsfolk, and strangers who'd known Henry's handshake. The program in my hand listed me as Emma Hayes, a name that wasn't mine. My parents had returned, not for him, but for the $75 million 0 cents he'd left behind. Claire and Marcus, in their tailored black, glided down the aisle like vultures in disguise, their faces practiced with grief. I gripped the program, my knuckles white, as Claire stepped to the podium, her voice dripping with lies about loyalty and love. I wanted to scream, to tear the program to shreds, but James Carter, Henry's lawyer, caught my eye. His nod was subtle, a silent command. Wait. So I did, my rage simmering, my heart pounding with the weight of 10 years and 5 near deaths. They'd left me in the dust, tried to erase me, but Grandpa had left me something they'd never see coming. A pen, a truth, and a fight I was ready to win. The church doors swung shut behind me, the echo swallowed by the hum of the Colorado evening. The air outside was crisp, tasting of pine and the faint smoke of a distant wildfire. My black dress clung to my skin, too tight, too formal for the girl who'd spent her life mending fences and dodging bears. I clutched the crumpled funeral program, Emma Hayes glaring up at me like a taunt. Claire and Marcus had vanished into the crowd, their tailored grief melting into the sea of mourners, but their presence lingered like a bruise. They weren't here for Grandpa Henry. They were here for his $75 million 0 cents legacy, and I was the only thing standing in their way. I walked to Grandpa's truck, the old Ford F-150 parked crookedly under a street lamp. The driver's side door creaked as I climbed in, the leather seat still warm from the day's heat. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, not from fear, but from something hotter, sharper. Rage mixed with a spark of something new. Resolve. James Carter, Grandpa's lawyer, had given me that nod in the church, a silent promise that this wasn't over. I wasn't just Emily Harper, the abandoned kid anymore. I was Henry Harper's heir, and I had a fight to finish. The ranch was 30 minutes from town, a winding drive through sagebrush plains and looming pines. The headlights cut through the dark, catching the glint of a coyote's eyes before it darted into the brush. My mind churned, replaying Claire's eulogy, her voice smooth as silk, weaving lies about loyalty and forgiveness. Loyalty? She'd left me on a porch at 8, my backpack heavier than my heart. Forgiveness? She'd stood there, dabbing dry eyes, while the program erased my name. I tightened my grip on the wheel, the memory of that night 10 years ago burning fresh, the taillights fading, the dust settling, the silence that never broke. Back at the ranch, the porch light flickered, just like it always had. I stepped inside, the familiar smell of cedar and coffee wrapping around me like an old friend. The house was too quiet without Grandpa's low whistle or the clink of his coffee mug. I dropped my coat by the door and moved to the kitchen, where a single light glowed over the table. My eyes landed on the desk in the corner, the one Grandpa used for his ledgers and letters. I hadn't touched it since he died, but something pulled me toward it now, like a whisper I couldn't ignore. The top drawer stuck, as always, but I jiggled it free. There it was, the silver fountain pen, its barrel gleaming under the lamplight. I'd found it earlier, tucked away like a secret, but I hadn't understood its weight until now. I turned it over, my thumb tracing the inscription. Truth waits for the patient. Grandpa's words echoed in my head, from a morning over pancakes when I was 16, my voice sharp with frustration over a teacher who'd called me stubborn. Someday, he'd said, sliding the pen across the table, you'll use this to settle something people tried to steal. I'd thought he meant my pride, maybe my grades. Now I knew better. He meant everything. I sat in his chair, the leather creaking under me, and turned the pen over again. My eyes drifted to the desk's underside, where a faint groove caught the light. A circular notch, barely visible unless you knew to look. My pulse quickened. I pressed the pen's base into the groove, and with a soft click, a hidden drawer slid open beneath my knees. My breath caught. Inside was a stack of folders. A flash drive labeled Claire and Marcus, 2017, and a sealed envelope with my name in Grandpa's sharp handwriting. I reached for the top folder, my fingers trembling. Notarized affidavits, medical reports, a psychiatric evaluation, pages proving Grandpa's mind was as clear as a mountain stream. One report, dated 2 months after Claire and Marcus tried to declare him unfit, read, "Subject exhibits full cognitive function, no signs of decline." Another folder held emails from Marcus's old lawyer, a slick Denver attorney outlining strategy to seize Henry's investments. The words were cold, calculated, dripping with greed. I opened the envelope next, a single sheet, handwritten, no legalese, just Grandpa's voice on paper. If you're reading this, Emily, they've come back. Not for me, but for what I built. They'll try to take it, they always do. But you're stronger than their lies. Use the pen. It unlocks more than ink. My throat tightened. I glanced at the flash drive, my heart pounding. I hadn't plugged it in yet, but I knew it held something damning. Maybe a recording, maybe proof of their betrayal. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and stared at the ceiling. You planned for this, didn't you? I whispered, half expecting his voice to answer. The next morning, I met James at the Larimer County Courthouse, the air sharp with the promise of snow. He stood on the steps, his gray overcoat draped over one arm, a briefcase in the other. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, like a hawk spotting prey. They filed, he said, skipping pleasantries. Emergency petition. Claire's claiming Henry had Alzheimer's, thought it was 1975, even called you by your aunt's name. I swallowed hard, nausea rising. My Aunt Maggie died before I was born. They didn't even check their lies. James's smirk was thin but fierce. They didn't, but we did. Inside, the courthouse smelled of stale coffee and polished wood. We were ushered into a consultation room, a long table scarred from years of family battles. The probate clerk, a woman with gray hair pinned tight, held a file and tapped the table like she was counting down to a verdict. "Miss Harper, Mr. Carter have submitted their petition. You have 15 minutes to respond." James didn't blink. "We won't need 15. He opened his briefcase and laid out a manila envelope. "This is Henry Harper's last will, filed under seal last November. It names Emily Harper as sole heir and executor of all assets, land, property, investments. Notarized, witnessed, airtight." Claire, sitting across from us, let out a scoff, her lipstick too dark for the morning light. "He was confused," she snapped. "She's barely 19, for God's sake. He didn't know what he was signing." I wanted to lunge across the table, to scream that she'd left me on a porch like forgotten luggage. But James's hand brushed mine under the table, a warning to stay calm. He pulled out the flash drive. "This will clarify things." The clerk plugged it into a laptop, and Grandpa's voice filled the room, steady and unshaken. "This is Henry Harper, November 12, 2017. I'm recording this in full clarity. My daughter and her husband think I've lost my mind, that I don't deserve to decide my legacy, but I do. I forgive them, but I won't enable them. They abandoned Emily like she was nothing. If you're hearing this, they're trying again. Emily, you wait. You're stronger than they know." The room went silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums. Claire's face was a mask, her mouth opening, then closing like a fish out of water. Marcus stared at the speaker, his jaw tight, betrayed by the truth. The clerk closed her folder. "Petition denied. Effective immediately, Ms. Harper assumes full executive authority." James stood, extending a hand. "You're free, Emily, from them and their shadows." I didn't take his hand. I stood on my own, my legs steady despite the storm in my chest. Outside, the air was colder, sharper, like the world had exhaled. Claire's heels clicked behind me as I reached the courthouse steps. "You think this makes you someone?" she hissed, her smile venomous. "A piece of paper and some lawyer tricks." He turned, my voice low but steady. "It makes me someone he trusted. That's enough." She opened her mouth, but I didn't wait. I walked away, James at my side, the cold no longer biting. He leaned in, his voice quieter. "There's more. Henry left something else, not filed with the will." My heart skipped. "What?" "Let's just say this isn't just about money." Back at the ranch, I didn't turn on the lights. The house was dark, the kind of dark that feels alive, heavy with secrets. I sat on the couch, my coat still on, the flash drive in my hand. The weight of it felt like a grenade. I plugged it into Grandpa's old laptop, my fingers trembling as the screen lit up. Another recording loaded, this one dated 2016. Grandpa's face appeared, his eyes sharp despite the lines at deep. "Emily, if you're watching this, you've found the safe. They tried to take everything. My name, my work, my land. They doctored records, bribed a doctor, even tried to lock me in a home, but I saw it coming. The flash drive has proof: bank transfers, forged contracts, their plan to funnel my foundation's money into their accounts. You're the only one I trust to stop them." My breath caught. I opened the folders on the drive, financial records, canceled grants, a paper trail of Claire and Marcus's greed. They hadn't just abandoned me. They'd tried to erase Grandpa, to strip him of his legacy while he was still breathing. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking with a mix of fury and purpose. They weren't getting away with this. The next day, I found a manila envelope under a stack of mail, stamped in red, "Notice of Civil Complaint." Inside were accusations, undue influence, elder abuse, interference with familial rights. Tucked behind was a handwritten note in Claire's cursive. "You've made your point, Emily. Stop embarrassing the family. No apology, no regret, just shame dressed up in ink." I stared at it, my anger flaring. Embarrassing the family? They'd left me at 8, tried to steal Grandpa's life, and now they wanted me to play nice? I called James. "They're suing again," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "I want to fight back. Fraud, theft, defamation, everything." He didn't hesitate. "We start tonight." The second lawsuit came fast, like a snake striking from the grass. Claire and Marcus's new lawyer, a slick Denver type with a jawline made for TV, paced the courtroom like a predator. "This young woman manipulated a vulnerable elder," he boomed. "She exploited Henry Harper's declining state for her own gain. This is elder abuse, Your Honor." I sat still, my hands folded, letting the lies wash over me. James stood, calm as a mountain. "This is harassment disguised as litigation," he said, holding up the will, the recordings, the prior ruling. "We have precedent, evidence, and truth." The judge didn't blink. "Case dismissed. No grounds. Prior rulings stand." Claire's face tightened, her jaw clenched so hard I could hear her teeth grind. Marcus didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the floor. As we left, I overheard whispers in the courthouse hallway. Gossip that I'd forged the will, that I was a cold-hearted schemer. The words stung, but I kept walking. At the grocery store later, picking up bread and milk, I heard it again. "She's the one who sued her own parents, right? Tricked the old man into signing everything over." I gripped the cart, my knuckles white, until a soft voice broke through. "Emily." It was Miss Clara, my high school history teacher, her eyes kind behind her glasses. "Henry was so proud of you. Don't let the noise drown that out." I nodded, clutching the egg carton too tight, my throat too full to speak. That night, alone in the ranch, I played their voicemails. Claire's voice was ice. "This isn't what family does, Emily." Marcus's was sharper. "You'll regret this. You'll lose everything." Even my cousin Lily chimed in. "Drop it, Emily, you're tearing us apart." Each message was a chip at my resolve, but then I saw the leather pouch James had given me after the hearing. I hadn't opened it yet, too raw from the courthouse. I untied the drawstring, my fingers slow. Inside was a brass key, heavy and cold, and a folded note in Grandpa's handwriting. "If you ever feel like quitting, unlock what I left behind. It's yours because you never asked for anything." The note included coordinates, no address, just numbers pointing to a place I didn't know. My heart raced. I grabbed my coat, my bag, the key, and headed for Grandpa's truck. The engine roared to life and I drove into the night, the Rockies looming like silent guardians. The coordinates led to a dirt road off Highway 34, unmarked, hidden by pines. The truck's tires crunched over gravel as I climbed higher, the air thinning, the stars sharp above. The road ended at a small A-safe cabin, half sunk into the mountainside, its windows dark but deliberate, like it was waiting for me. I stepped out, the key heavy in my hand. The air smelled of frost and cedar, sharp enough to cut through my doubts. The front door's lock clicked smoothly, and I pushed it open, the hinges whispering. Inside, the cabin was sparse. Wood floors, a stone fireplace, shelves of old books. It smelled like Grandpa's sweaters, tobacco, and time. I stood still, letting the quiet settle, then remembered the pouch. The key's tag read one word: back. I moved to the fireplace, running my hand along the mantel. A faint seam caught my fingers, a hidden brass plate behind a stack of worn paperbacks. Another keyhole. My pulse thundered as I slid the key in. A soft whir of gears and the back wall of the fireplace creaked inward. revealing a small room lined with metal cabinets, a desk, and a voice recorder coated in dust. A plaque on the wall read, "Truth takes time." I opened the first cabinet, folders dated over a decade with names I knew, Claire Harper, Marcus Harper. One labeled Fraud Inquiry held bank records, forged contracts, proof Claire had siphoned funds from Grandpa's foundation. Another detailed Marcus's shell company, diverting grants meant for rural schools. My hands shook as I found the amendment to Grandpa's estate, filed quietly when I was 12, naming me his heir by design, not default. The date matched a week when I'd been sick with fever, Grandpa reading The Call of the Wild by my bedside. I pressed play on the recorder. Grandpa's voice filled the room, low and steady. "James, if you're hearing this, Emily found the room. She's ready. They'll say she's too young, too fragile, but she's not. Emily sees the truth. I gave them chances, offered them honesty. They spit on it. She builds, James. That's why I chose her." Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. I stood there, holding the recorder, the weight of his trust anchoring me. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for his name, his legacy, the truth he'd protected for me. I drove back to the ranch at dawn, the files in my bag, my resolve ironclad. James met me at a diner in Fort Collins, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like regret. I slid the folders across the table. "I want to press charges," I said. "Fraud, theft, defamation, all of it." He nodded, his eyes gleaming. "We begin tonight." The next week, I stood on the stage of the Fort Collins Community Center, the lights hot against my skin. The Henry Harper Foundation launch gala was packed. Ranchers, teachers, local reporters, kids in borrowed blazers. I wore a navy jacket with Grandpa's silver pin, his initials etched like a quiet vow. "My grandfather believed in dignity," I began, my voice steady despite the tremble in my hands, "had measured legacy by who you leave it with, not what you leave behind." The crowd was silent, eyes locked on me, cameras flashing. I spoke of his plans, libraries, scholarships, wildlife preserves, each word a brick in the wall I was building. Then I saw them. Claire and Marcus slipped in through a side door, her black coat sleek, his face grayer but no less calculated. They didn't sit, just stood by the press table, Claire's arms crossed, Marcus whispering to a blogger. James at the back gave me a nod. I kept going, my voice stronger. A reporter stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Mrs. Harper, your mother claims you cut her out of the foundation for revenge, that you're rewriting Henry's legacy. Is that true?" My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. I took the mic, my eyes finding Claire's across the room. "When I was 8, my parents left me on a ranch porch with a backpack and a promise they never kept. They didn't come back. They didn't call. And when they realized what Grandpa left me, they tried to erase me again." The room stilled, the air heavy. I held up a packet, thick with notarized proof. "This is their timeline. Abandonment, forged medical records, attempts to steal Henry's estate through fraud." The crowd murmured, ripples turning to waves. Claire's jaw tensed, Marcus frozen beside her. I didn't stop. I don't owe anyone a history that flatters liars. James stepped forward, his presence a quiet anchor. Miss Clara dabbed her eyes in the back, and a councilman nodded, whispering to his neighbor. I stepped off the stage, not triumphant, just whole. Outside, James caught me in the hallway. "They leaked a video," he said, pulling up his tablet. "Posted to a local blog an hour ago, claiming it proves Henry was incompetent." My stomach dropped as I hit play. Grandpa appeared, slouched, mumbling, eyes unfocused. For 30 seconds it looked real. Too real. Then the camera panned, showing me at 16 tossing a pillow at him, laughing. "Come on, Grandpa, you're not even trying," he grinned, dropped the act and winked. If anyone uses this against me, you know they've got nothing left. I looked at James. Put the full version on the projector now. 10 minutes later, I was back on stage, the crowd larger, the air electric. Before we announce the first scholarship, I want to share something, I said, nodding to the AV tech. The edited clip played first, the room shifting uncomfortably. Then the full video rolled. My laughter, Grandpa's wink, his final line. The crowd erupted, not just in laughter but in relief, the truth cutting through the lies like a blade. I glanced at Claire and Marcus, frozen, their faces pale. The applause faded, and I pulled out the silver pen, clicking it once. This pen, I said, signing the Foundation's launch document, once wrote me out of a will. Now it signs the future Grandpa believed in. Outside, the night was cool, the stars sharp above the Rockies. Claire and Marcus were waiting, her heels sinking into the gravel, his jaw tight. You think you're untouchable? Claire hissed. You're just a kid playing with power you don't understand. I stepped forward, placing 2 manila envelopes in her hand. Cease and desist, I said. Fraud, libel, you'll be served tomorrow, but I thought you deserved a heads up. Marcus scoffed, but Claire's hands shook, her tears falling not for Grandpa, but for the stage she'd lost. James approached, his voice low. We traced the video. It came from a burner account tied to Claire's old assistant. We've already filed. As we walked to the truck, I turned back once. I didn't win, I whispered to myself. I just stopped losing to people who never deserved me. The ranch welcomed me home, its creaks familiar, its shadows soft. I poured tea and sat in Grandpa's study, the brass lamp glowing. I opened the final envelope from the cabin, marked, open only after they try to take everything. Inside was a single sheet. Grandpa's words unhurried. Emily, I chose you, always you. Claire sees mirrors, not people. Marcus knows numbers, not hearts. You stayed, you built, you listened. The cabin's yours, not for business, but for peace. When the noise gets loud, go there. It'll remind you who you are. A folded deed fell into my lap, the cabin's title in my name. I laughed through tears, the pen warm in my hand. It wasn't just a tool, it was his echo, my compass. I called Miss Clara that night. What if we added a scholarship for kids left behind? I asked. She paused, her voice soft. Henry would love that. So would I. I packed light, the pen, the letter, a sweater, and drove to the cabin, the road winding through pine-scented silence. The porch creaked as I stepped onto it, the horizon spilling gold. I opened my journal, the one Grandpa gave me at 15, and wrote, I am not what they abandoned. I am what he believed in. The wind moved through the trees, and for the first time I wasn't fighting. I was free,